I froze in horror as the words, "Go back where you came from," dripped down my Rolls-Royce in blood-red paint. My stomach turned to ice as this powerful HOA president, a woman who'd terrorized our neighborhood for years, destroyed my $350,000 car while shouting that I must have stolen it because she couldn't accept that a 21-year-old guy who looked like me could achieve success in America. The pure hatred in her eyes still haunts me. But what she didn't know was that her own blind prejudice would soon become her ultimate downfall. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because this story of patience, strategy, and sweet justice will leave you speechless. This insane tale isn't just about a nightmare HOA Karen, but about how I used the law and technology to outsmart her when she tried to steal my American dream, just because I didn't fit the image she expected. Get ready, because this is going to be a wild ride from start to finish. My name is Ethan Wilson, and at 21 years old, I'd just achieved what many would consider the American dream. After 3 grueling years of coding in my college dorm room, I'd sold my software startup for $30 million. The company I'd built from nothing was now being integrated into a major tech corporation's ecosystem, and I finally allowed myself to celebrate this milestone. My parents had always taught me to be humble and practical with money, but they also emphasized the importance of acknowledging achievements. Work hard, play hard, as they say, so I decided to reward myself with something special. A beautiful Rolls-Royce Ghost in midnight blue. My parents immigrated to America when they were in their 20s, and they worked multiple jobs to put me through school. They struggled with language barriers, cultural differences, and the constant pressure to prove themselves worthy of the opportunities this country offered. Growing up, I watched them come home exhausted, day after day, yet they never complained. Instead, they reminded me that with determination and education, I could achieve things they never could. When I called to tell them about selling my company, my dad couldn't speak through his tears. My mom just kept saying, "We are so proud, so proud." Their reaction meant more to me than the money ever could. With part of my newfound wealth, I purchased a beautiful house in Pinecrest Estates, an upscale neighborhood in California with immaculate lawns, grand entrances, and a sense of established prestige. The neighborhood had an active homeowners association, HOA, which I didn't think much about at the time. I was just excited to have a place of my own after years of dorm rooms and a tiny studio apartment. The day I moved in was sunny and perfect. I drove my new Rolls-Royce up the driveway, feeling like I'd finally arrived. Several neighbors waved or nodded in greeting, and an older gentleman named Michael Sullivan even came over to introduce himself. "Welcome to Pinecrest," Michael said with a warm smile as he shook my hand. "I'm just 3 houses down. If you need anything at all or have questions about the neighborhood, don't hesitate to ask." Michael was a software engineer himself and seemed genuinely interested in my background. He mentioned he was a first-generation immigrant too, having come to America from Ireland as a young man. "It's good to see young entrepreneurs doing well," he added, before heading back to his house. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have such friendly neighbors. But not everyone was so welcoming. As I was unloading some boxes from my car, I noticed a woman watching me intently from across the street. She was in her late 50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer sunglasses, and an expression that could only be described as suspicious. I smiled and waved, trying to be friendly, but she just continued staring, her lips pressed into a thin line. I didn't think much of it then. People can be shy or reserved, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Later that evening, as I was parking my Rolls-Royce in the driveway after picking up some groceries, the same woman approached me with quick, determined steps. Her posture was rigid, her chin lifted with an air of authority that suggested she was used to people listening when she spoke. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice sharp as she looked me up and down. "What exactly are you doing here?" The emphasis she placed on "you" made it clear this wasn't just a friendly neighbor introducing herself. I was taken aback, but kept my composure. "I'm Ethan Wilson," I replied with a smile, extending my hand. "I just moved in today. I'm the new owner." My hand remained suspended in the air as she ignored it, her gaze shifting pointedly to my car and then back to me. "And I suppose this is the actual homeowner's car that you're driving?" she asked with a skeptical raise of her eyebrow. The implication was clear as day. She didn't believe someone like me could own a home in this neighborhood, let alone a luxury vehicle. I felt a familiar twinge in my chest. The same feeling I'd experienced many times growing up whenever someone assumed limitations on me because of how I looked. "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the rising frustration, "both the house and the car are mine. I just purchased them." I could have explained my success, detailed my company's acquisition, or defended my right to be there, but I shouldn't have had to. My ownership of my property wasn't up for debate or approval. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Well, in this neighborhood, we have certain standards. It's interesting to see what kind of people are moving in these days. With that, she turned and walked away, her designer heels clicking on the pavement like a countdown to trouble. I watched her go, a knot forming in my stomach. I dealt with prejudice before, but I had hoped, perhaps naively, that my success would shield me from such encounters in my own home. That night, I sat on my mostly empty patio, looking out at the manicured landscape of Pinecrest Estates. The excitement of my move-in day had been tainted by that brief interaction. I didn't even know her name yet, but I had the sinking feeling that this woman was going to be a problem. Little did I know just how much of a problem she would become, or that this was just the beginning of what would turn into an all-out war for my right to exist peacefully in a space I had rightfully earned. The problem started almost immediately after my encounter with the woman, whom I soon learned was Barbara Thompson, the HOA president, no less. Within 3 days of moving in, I received my first violation notice slipped under my door. According to the letter, my Rolls-Royce was not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the community and needed to be parked in the garage at all times. I checked the HOA bylaws carefully. There was nothing specifically prohibiting luxury vehicles from being parked in driveways. Other neighbors had Mercedes, BMWs, and even a Bentley visible from the street. The difference, it seemed, was who owned them. Barbara was a widow in her late 50s who had inherited significant wealth from her late husband. She'd been HOA president for 5 years running, and according to my neighbor Michael, she ran the community like her personal fiefdom. She had been a real estate broker before becoming a full-time housewife and HOA enforcer. She campaigned for HOA president, promising to maintain neighborhood standards, Michael explained with air quotes and an eye roll. What she meant was keeping out anyone who doesn't fit her idea of who belongs here. I decided to handle the situation diplomatically at first. I wrote a polite response, citing the HOA regulations, pointing out that my vehicle complied with all written rules. Instead of backing down, Barbara escalated. Within a week, I received 3 more violation notices. My trash cans were allegedly 2 inches out of the designated area. The curtains visible from my front windows were non-conforming colors. My lawn, which had been professionally maintained by the previous owner's service, whom I continued to employ, suddenly had excessive growth in one corner. Each violation came with a warning of potential fine. This wasn't just about rules, it was targeted harassment. I began to document everything, taking photos of my property daily, saving all notices, and keeping detailed records of every interaction. I also installed security cameras around my property, a decision that would prove invaluable later. During this time, I met Thomas Davis, a retired African-American attorney who served on the HOA board and lived at the end of my street. Thomas invited me over for coffee one afternoon, and I quickly realized he had an agenda beyond neighborly pleasantries. "I've noticed Barbara's sudden interest in your property," he said carefully, stirring his coffee. "You're not the first, you know. She has a pattern of, let's call it selective enforcement against residents who don't fit her vision for Pinecrest." Thomas introduced me to Amanda Foster, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher and single mother who lived across from him. Amanda had purchased her home using a VA loan after serving in the military. "Barbara made my first year here hell," Amanda admitted when we met. Constant complaints about my children's toys in the yard, criticizing my holiday decorations, even reporting my service dog as a violation of the pet policy. It only stopped when Thomas helped me threaten legal action, and Amanda's eyes held a mixture of empathy and warning as she added, "She'll keep pushing until you either leave or push back harder than she expected." The situation reached a new level when I invited a few college friends over for a small backyard barbecue one Saturday afternoon. We were a small group, just 5 people total, playing music at a reasonable volume and enjoying the perfect California weather. We were grilling burgers and sharing stories about our college days when Barbara appeared at my side gate without warning, her phone held up as if she were documenting a crime scene. "This is a violation of the noise ordinance," she announced loudly, though our music was barely audible beyond the yard. "And there are too many cars parked on the street. That's a violation of Section 3.4 of the HOA guidelines." There were exactly 3 cars, all properly parked, and none of them were blocking anyone's driveway or creating any congestion on our wide suburban street. My friends, feeling uncomfortable under Barbara's hostile scrutiny, made excuses to leave early. As they departed, I saw Barbara taking pictures of their license plates. The message was clear. Visitors, especially diverse ones like my friend group, weren't welcome in her kingdom. That evening, after everyone had gone, I stood in my empty backyard, feeling a familiar mixture of anger and resignation. It was the same feeling I'd experienced throughout my life when faced with people who had decided who I was and what I deserved before even knowing me. The final straw came when I overheard Barbara speaking to another neighbor while I was bringing in my mail. She didn't see me around the corner as she lowered her voice conspiratorially. "There's something suspicious about him in that car," she was saying. "I mean, these young people, especially that type. How could they possibly afford a car like that unless they're involved in, you know what I mean?" Her implications were crystal clear. She was suggesting that my ethnicity and age made it impossible for me to legitimately own luxury items. The thinly veiled racism made my blood boil, but I took a deep breath and walked back to my house without confronting her. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be driven out of my home by prejudice disguised as rule enforcement. I had worked too hard and overcome too many obstacles to allow someone like Barbara Thompson to make me feel unwelcome in a house I had purchased with my own hard-earned success. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in housing discrimination, installed additional security cameras, including some hidden ones that Barbara wouldn't notice, and began meticulously documenting every interaction. "Document everything," Thomas had advised. "Barbara has connections in this community, but facts and evidence will always win in the end." As I set up the last camera overlooking my driveway, Michael stopped by to check on me. "Be careful," he warned. "Barbara doesn't just write violation notices. When she really wants someone gone, she escalates things in ways you might not expect." How right he was. I had no idea that Barbara was about to take our conflict to a dangerous new level that went far beyond petty HOA citations. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a distinct chill whenever I encountered neighbors I hadn't yet met. People who had initially waved or nodded when I first moved in now avoided eye contact or hurried into their homes when they saw me approaching. At first I thought I was being paranoid, but then Amanda confirmed my suspicions. Barbara had been busy spreading rumors about me throughout the neighborhood. "She's telling everyone your car must be stolen, or that you're running some kind of drug operation," Amanda explained when we met for coffee. She doesn't say it directly, of course. She uses phrases like unusual income sources and suspicious late-night activities, but the implication is clear. The news didn't surprise me, but it still hurt. I had spent my entire life working to defy stereotypes, only to have my character assassinated by someone who knew nothing about me beyond my age and ethnicity. Thomas advised me to continue gathering evidence and avoiding direct confrontation for now. "Barbara wants you to lose your temper," he explained. "That would just reinforce the narrative she's creating about you." So I maintained a polite facade whenever I encountered her, even as I seethed inside at the unfairness of it all. One evening, after a particularly long day of video conferences with my former company's integration team, I sat alone in my dimly lit home office, scrolling through neighborhood social media posts that a sympathetic neighbor had forwarded to me. The screen illuminated my face as I read comment after comment speculating about my suspicious lifestyle. Some neighbors wondered how someone so young could afford such an expensive car and house. Others made thinly veiled references to possible illegal activities. A few even suggested calling the police if they saw unusual activity at my address. In that moment, sitting in the dark with the glow of digital prejudice washing over me, I felt a profound sense of isolation. I had achieved everything my parents had sacrificed for, everything America had promised was possible, with hard work and determination, only to discover that success didn't protect me from the same old biases. I questioned whether I belonged in this neighborhood, whether I should sell the house and move somewhere else, somewhere I wouldn't have to constantly prove my right to exist. The weight of constantly being viewed as an outsider, of having my accomplishments dismissed or treated with suspicion, felt heavier than ever. The next morning, I was reviewing my security camera footage when I noticed something disturbing. One of my cameras, positioned to monitor my driveway and Rolls-Royce, had been physically moved to point at the sky instead. I checked the previous day's footage and saw Barbara approaching the camera, looking around furtively before reaching up to adjust its angle. This wasn't just harassment anymore, this was trespassing and tampering with my property. I immediately checked my car for damage and, finding none, felt a momentary relief. But the violation of my property and privacy shook me. Barbara had crossed a line, moving from passive-aggressive notes and rumors to actively interfering with my security system. I called Thomas right away to update him on this development. "This is actually good news," Thomas said, surprising me. "She's escalating because you're not reacting the way she wants. You haven't lost your cool or moved away, and now she's broken the law in a way that's clearly documented. Keep backing up that footage." Later that day, I was working in my front yard, planting some new flowers to brighten up the entrance, when I noticed Barbara parked across the street in her Mercedes SUV. She wasn't even pretending not to watch me. She sat there with sunglasses on, occasionally lifting her phone as if taking pictures. I decided to approach her car, maintaining my composure despite my racing heart. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thompson," I said, keeping my voice friendly and calm. "Is there something I can help you with?" I knew she was watching me, and I wanted to give her the opportunity to explain herself, or at least make her uncomfortable enough to leave. She lowered her sunglasses slightly, her eyes cold. "People like you don't belong here," she said without preamble. "I'm just making sure our neighborhood stays safe." The emphasis she placed on safe made it clear what she really meant. She saw me as a threat simply because of who I was. I maintained my smile, though it took considerable effort. "I understand you moved my security camera yesterday," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'd appreciate it if you'd stay off my property. That's trespassing, you know." I watched her expression change from smugness to momentary alarm as she realized I had evidence of her actions. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice rising slightly. "But I'll tell you this, you'll regret moving to Pinecrest. I can make things very difficult for people who don't fit in." With that, she started her engine and drove away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with my heart pounding in my chest. That confrontation solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to be intimidated out of my home. I consulted with my attorney, who confirmed that Barbara's actions constituted harassment and potentially defamation, given the false claims she was making about me to neighbors. "Document everything," he advised, echoing Thomas, "and consider installing some additional hidden cameras